Will Kirby Smart's biggest concern for this 2025 Georgia football roster end up hurting the Dogs, end up inhibiting them from being championship contenders this coming season? Welcome in, everybody. Happy Sunday evening. Kirby over and over and over again, he just kept repeating himself. He kept barking at us in the media during spring practice. And the thing that he kept harping on was, guys, this team is inexperienced. This roster has a lot of young players, a lot of guys who haven't played significant snaps, haven't started more than a couple games, or haven't started at all. A lot of freshmen. And then he also considers transfer players to be kind of inexperienced when it comes to the system, because they are. Is this going to be an issue for Georgia in 2025? Will the youth of this roster prevail to be a problem? I will say, when you go back over the last few years and look at Georgia's rosters, and if you look at a lot of championship rosters in college football, and we can kind of do a mental exercise there, but they have older players. They have guys that have been around for a long time. They have guys that have been in big moments, that have contributed to winning and just have experience. That's not something that you can point to this Georgia football team and say, hey, that team's got a lot of experience, that team's got a lot of older players. It's part of why in 2021, really, that was kind of, well, obviously that was a turning point for Georgia football history, right? When you talk about getting over that mountaintop, winning the national championship, yada, 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 right? But heading into that year, that was the most buzz Georgia had gotten since that 2017 season where they lost the national championship. Heading into 2021, there was excitement. There was expectations that Georgia was going to compete for a national championship. Part of that is because of all of the older talent that had been around, experienced juniors, seniors. You know, in addition to having young players that are really good, there was excitement about Georgia being championship contenders. You can't look at the 2025 roster and do that. I've only counted 6 players, not counting special teams that have been around the block or have been on this Georgia football team for a couple years. We'll go through that. And are these older players enough? Do they have enough of them? Are these guys, you don't have to have older players in key spots at every position, but you got to have them as leadership, and you need that experience to do well. Ryan Curley from Dawg post, there are 6 guys on this team that kind of fit this criteria, have been at Georgia for a while, right? So, yes, Noah Thomas, Zachary Branch, Josh McCray, a couple of the defensive transfers. Yes, they're older. They are juniors, seniors, but they are not experienced at Georgia. So I'm not counting them for this exactly, but the criteria for this is, are you a multi-year starter at Georgia already? Are you in year 4 or 5? Have you played in big moments, right? That is kind of the criteria for experienced older guys that they had a ton of over the last few years. I wrote down the ones that they had just on the 2024 team as well. But hear it out. On offense, these are the players that fit that criteria. Micah Morris, who hasn't started a lot of games, right, on the offensive line. Oscar Delp, the tight end. And Dylan Bell, wide receiver. That's the group that fits the criteria, that's been around at Georgia, has started for multiple years, or is in year 4 or 5. Micah Morris entering year 5, one of the older players on this football team. I believe he actually might be he is the oldest player on this Georgia football team, has been at Georgia the longest, back in that 2021 recruiting class. This is year 5 for him at Georgia. And he is going to be really important in terms of experience. Oscar Delp, year 4, and entering year 2 as a full-time starter. Obviously was the second tight end behind Brock Bowers in 2023. So really, he started some games there too. And Brock Bowers was hurt some in 2023. So he started as the number 1 tight end in a few of those games. Dylan Bell played as a freshman and then played a lot as a sophomore, was a full-time starter last year as a junior. He'll be a full-time starter this year as a senior. So Yes, they do have a handful of those players, but they don't have a ton of them. On defense, it's not even quite as good when you look at the defensive side of the ball. Christian Miller, a guy who is entering year 4, but hasn't played a lot. This is a guy on the interior defensive line for Georgia. Viewed as one of the more talented older players on this Georgia football team that's going to make a big impact, and I believe that he will make a big impact. But he hasn't played a ton, right? He's been playing for a couple of years, has dealt with some injuries, has waited for his turn, but that is one of the older players that you get on this team in year 4. C.J. Allen. And he's the youngest player that I have on this list is C.J. Allen. He's entering year 3, but he started games as a true freshman, was a full-time starter last year as a sophomore, and will be the main linebacker for Georgia on the inside this year as a true junior. And it'll probably be his last year for Georgia if things go according to what his plan probably is, which is go to the NFL after a really good junior year, I would assume. And then you get Dalen Everett, who is entering year 4. He's going to enter year 3 as the full-time starter on the outside as a corner, and it'll be his second year as the number 1 corner for Georgia. Was the second corner in 2023 with Kamari Lassiter on the opposite side of him. So you only really have 3 guys on each side of the football that are older, been around for a couple years or have started games, right? That's that kind of criteria. Now, you get special teams guys like Peyton Woodring now, who's played a good bit, and you'll get Brett Thorson. I almost blanked on his name. Now, yes, they will have some older transfer players. That'll add to it, to the age roster, but have actually been around in Georgia and have had that chemistry and have been in the system. They don't have that. Is that going to be a problem for Georgia, that they're relying so much on the 2024 class, like I talked about a few days ago? Nate Frazier, KJ Bolden, these sophomores. Chris Cole is going to play a lot. Joseph Jonah-Jonye is going to play a lot. There'll be some juniors that are going to be important, right? But they don't have that old talent. In 2024, right, this is an SEC championship team. Didn't go on to compete for the national championship the way that the 3 previous teams did. And Georgia, obviously, in 23 didn't, but that was a national championship caliber roster. In 2024, people that fit the criteria I talked about to where Georgia only has 6 this year, 4 guys on the offensive line who had been around or had started, right? Jared Wilson being the least experienced of them. Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge, Jared Wilson, Xavier Truss, Carson Beck, the quarterback. I threw Trevor Etienne in there because he'd been starting in the SEC for multiple years. Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, right? That's more on the offensive side of the football than they had this year. And then you flip it to defense. I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 names. Dan Jackson, Stackhouse, Brinson, Chambliss, Smile Mondon, Malachi Starks, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker. They had a ton of guys who had started multiple years, who had been in big spots, who had been around in the program. And that's part of why, in a year where they sputtered and there was a lack of consistency for that football team, they had older guys who had been around and had been in big moments. And that's part of why they went on to win an SEC championship. That's part of why they beat Texas twice, right? Why they were able to claw out a win against Georgia Tech in overtime. Why they were able to claw out a very, very, very ugly win up at Lexington, right? In week 3 of the season. I think it was week 3 of the season. Yeah, week 3 last year where they win 13-12. Those types of games require experience and talent. In 2023, you think about that offense, guys like Brock Powers, Kendall Milton, Dejan Edwards, some offensive linemen, Marcus Roseby, Saint, right? They had that. On the defense side of the ball, Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard. I'm trying to name guys I haven't named already. I think Robert Beal was on that team, right? They had all of that. And when you think about Ohio State this past season, a lot of older players. Will Howard's an older player. Emeka Buka, 4-year guy, right? Travion Henderson, a guy that had been around for a few years and played a lot of spots for them. Josh Simmons, the offensive lineman. Just naming guys off the top of my head that I can think of. There were more, obviously. The 23 Michigan team had a ton of seniors on that team. 21 and 22 Georgia, the case is the same. 20 Alabama, same thing. 19 LSU, same thing. 18 Alabama. All of these really good teams that are competitive for the national championship, they typically have older talent. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, right? In 2017, who were the quarterbacks in that game in the national championship? Jake Fromm and then Tua Tagovailoa in the second half, freshman. Who were the key players at the end of the 2021 season or just in general? Young guys, Keely Ringo, Brock Bowers, A.D. Mitchell. So it's not the end-all, be-all, but they were in addition to the older talent. This is a concern that Kirby Smart has, and I'm curious as to if it's going to end up being a problem. Maybe a lack of cohesion, a lack of experience in those big spots together, and you don't have a quarterback who has been a multi-year starter or anything like that. Gunnar Stockton's going to go into his first year as a starter who hasn't played in a ton of those big spots. So I think this is a potential issue for Georgia. It's definitely something worth exploring and talking about. Kirby certainly thinks it's a problem. Do you think it's a problem? And I appreciate you. Go to dawgpost.com. Make sure you're checking all those things out. And go to the links in the description of this video down below. I appreciate you watching.